All right, so this video today is a little theory that I have. I got to thinking about this, and the more I thought about it, it seemed to make a lot of sense. So I thought I'd make a little video about it to see what you think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So please comment on the video if you come across it. And that theory is that Gen X are the breakers of the curse. What do I mean? Well, first off, I think we need to establish a few things here, and that is that the generations that we're dealing with currently that are in effect here are the boomers, Gen X, the millennials, Gen Z. And although there's other generations that have been or will be a part of all of this, these are the ones we're mainly discussing here today. And with that, I want to make sure that I also provide a disclaimer here that as I generalize all of these generations, I am by no means trying to categorize every individual into, their appropriate generation based on their age, because maybe what we're about to discuss isn't you, and maybe you stand out from, your generation. But all in all, for ease of conversation, I think that what I'm going to lay out here, for the most part, holds true. And so, first off, I'm saying that there's a curse or curses, right? So let's first establish that. Hopefully we can all agree at this point that we are definitely experiencing curses, or that the world is cursed, or the things that are going on in the world appear to be curses or cursed. So when I say this, that's what I'm talking about. And I want to make sure that I distinguish this topic today about talking about the curses of the generations with the concept of generational curses that maybe you have heard of, talked about in the Bible, because that is a biblical concept, generational curses. But what it's referring to are the curses mainly that can come down through the generations of a family bloodline, through the genetics of a bloodline or just through the family line, and that can lead to curses generationally throughout the family's, generations. That's different from this concept here today, where a generation such as the boomers, that whole generation has curses associated with it. And so I just wanted to make sure I also distinguish that's what I'm talking about. And I think that an honest review and an honest look out into that world, clearly there are curses. And for the most part, with the boomers being the elders in the room today, much of them hang on the decisions, the actions, just the culmination of things that have happened within their generation that has led to these curses in the place that we find ourselves today. And so the reason I think that this is the case, and I want to make sure that it's not coming across that we're coming down hard on boomers here, because that's not my intent. It's just to step outside of the box, to take a look in, and to show what I think is actually taking place here and why. And so, the boomers, we can't be getting mad at them for this, right? Because I mean, they are, after all, our parents and our grandparents and, whatever. So, I mean, this is not about cutting up the boomers. It's simply just trying to show how each generation has a role that's being played out here. And I think that what I can show is that their role has led us to this place of curses that we currently see today. And Gen X's role is to cancel out those curses. That's what I see when I step outside of the box and I take an honest review of what I'm seeing and what the impacts are of the current generations that are in play. This is what I see. Because it's no secret that the boomers, in terms of economics, the boomers have made out pretty well, I would say, right? Because I mean, a lot of people know that the boomers have, in many ways, made out like bandits, with the fact that the housing market and the markets in general have changed so much during their time, and they have categorically benefited from that in many ways. And just like talking about the housing market as an example, I mean, the boomers, they bought their houses dirt cheap in many cases. And when they sold their houses, they stood to make a pile of profit in terms of equity of the assets that they owned. And so to them, it probably looked like blessings. But what it was in reality for everybody else underneath them was curses coming down the line, right? Because now what that is left is a housing market that is so inflated that their children and grandchildren can't even afford to buy in to that. A lot of people can't even afford to own real estate today because of what that has done. And so this is what I mean when I'm talking about, the actions and, as we'll get into, the decisions of the boomers and the curses that have come from them. And we also need to understand that it's not their fault, though. I mean, the more I thought about this, this isn't, it is, I guess, their fault in a way, but it's not. We need to understand that we've all been had, right, in this life. We've all been deceived, and it's no different with the boomers. And so, yeah, a lot of them have retired wealthy and stood to benefit greatly from, these things previously discussed. I don't think for a lot of them it was their intent to destroy, you know, the wealth of the generations underneath them. But that's, what has happened, as collateral damage or whatever you want to call it. And so, I think we need to understand that the boomers, they grew up at a time where all they had was the television, right? The programming that they listen to on their favorite channel, the broadcast, networking. I mean, these are all words that mean things, guys. This is etymology of words, and words mean things. And so hopefully you can see in just the words themselves associated with the television that what has come from that box has not been good over the years. Okay. And what it has done specifically to that generation is programmed them into a way of thinking. And that's all they had, right? I mean, they were lucky. I mean, for a lot of them, they probably grew up with radios at first and then the television. If they had enough money to own one in their family, then maybe they got to take part in a television for a while, but that television led to programming. And that was the intent of the television all along. But that's what they had. And what they also had? A loyalty and respect for all authority, unquestioned, unchecked loyalty and trust in authority. And I think a lot of that was in large part due to this programming and also what was handed down from generations, before them, because there was a time, when there was morality, and that's the way, that it should be, and so that's what they were taught. Not to question authority. You do what the authority says. And so that's a generation of yes men for the most part, right? And so that's what the boomers were dealing with. And that's what led them to where they are today. And for a lot of them, what comes with old age is stubbornness, and it becomes very difficult to change your ways, when you get up there in years like that, right? I mean, it's very difficult to break an old dog, I mean, and so they're stuck in their ways, and it's hard to break that programming. But it is that and the decisions that have been made by the people of authority within their generation that have led us to this point where we find ourselves today. Wars and rumors of wars and economic turmoil and all the things that we're experiencing, all the things. This is what I mean when I say curses. These to me are obvious curses. But the old saying, that's the Peter they had to play with. And so, it is what it is, I guess, it is what it is. But then comes along Gen X, right? Here comes Gen X. And Gen X is uniquely positioned because, we also grew up with the television, for the first part of our life for a lot of us. But then came the internet. The World Wide Web entered the scene, and we entered into the technological age and the age of information. And so we were uniquely positioned to witness and experience a lot of what the boomers experienced. But in our adulthood came along all of this information and a change in the media landscape. And so Gen X was uniquely positioned to be able to see both sides of the coin. And it's due to that I think Gen X is the generation to break the curses, because we can see the bigger picture and we see it for what it is. And so we come along, and that mainstream media that the boomers trusted in so much and that they still trust and watch today, we see the lies, and we recognize the deception and the corruption and the agendas and the narratives and all the things that come along with it. We recognized it. And with the rise of the internet, we were able to obtain the information and to see the evidence to prove what we were seeing here, which was that the things that helped form the generation of the boomers and to keep them in line, well, we were able to see that for the lies that it is. And then what began to happen is Gen X began to speak out, because with the rise of the internet also came an opportunity to speak, because there was a rise of this new alternative media that came right along with it. And it's through that alternative media where the Gen X people that were awake were able to use their voice and to begin to point out the evils and the corruption of the things that had a stronghold over the boomers. And as we began to speak these truths out into the internet, more and more people begin to wake up from within the Gen X generation, not to mention the millennials and Gen Z. And so that's what I mean when I say Gen X is the curse breakers, because we have in many ways broken that curse that the boomers were under. And we are now paving the way and leading the way for the generations under us to see that truth and to try and build a different reality and a different future out in front of them because of it. And this is where they are uniquely positioned. You know, the millennials and the boomers, or the millennials and Gen Z, they are uniquely positioned because they are coming up at a time when the mainstream really plays no part. They, I don't think for the most part, pay any attention to it. And it is for that reason that it will eventually die, because for those within the Gen X, we obviously see that for what it is, and no one's paying attention. And so it has been on the decline for a long time, and I do believe it will die right along with the boomers. And so they're clawing their way, trying to get onto these platforms and to keep their voices alive, you know, here in the new alternative space. But for everybody who knows and recognizes them for what they are, no one's going to listen to them anyway. Not from these generations, not from the generations coming up. And so it's for that reason that the millennials and Gen Zs, and I would just like to say these kids, these generations seem to me to be like free spirits, right? I mean, a lot of them aren't stuck in the mold of the 9 to 5 grind, and you know, this is the only way to do things, and to be a good little tax-paying citizen, to go to public school, and then to go out into the world, go into a factory and work a mundane job day after day, just so that you can scrape by and be a nice little tax-paying robot for that authority. You know, that was okay for the boomers. For some reason, they were fine with that. Not these generations. Not these generations. They see that for what it is, and they want no part of it. And so for a lot of them, like I said, they're a free spirit. And they want a different life. They want something that looks different. And so those generations being uniquely positioned underneath Gen X, who broke the curse, who is currently breaking the curse of the boomers and those before them, now have an opportunity to hopefully change the world in the future for the better, because they can see all of the errors and the problems with the old system, because it's clearly recognizable. All you have to do is take an honest look at these things and review it honestly and logically, and you will be left with no other decision but that is a corrupt system and it needs to fall. And so hopefully they will build a new world with their free spirits, in a world that is completely contrary to that one, because they can see all the problems in it. And so hopefully they will take the good that they have seen and what is clearly evident from, that generation and even ours as Gen Xers, take the good, leave the bad, and build something new. And that's what I see. That's the possibility I see out in the future for these up and coming generations as they go out into the world and hopefully build something that looks completely different. Something that's built on authenticity, creativity, organic, natural, and pure, and not synthetic and fabricated like everything that we see that's involved in these curses today. And so it's for that reason that I think that Gen X has been and is currently the curse breakers. And so, yeah, I think it's a very interesting thought, and hopefully you will consider it. And I would love to hear your thoughts on it. So please agree or disagree. I'd love to hear from you. But all in all, I think that there is a good chance, hopefully, as I look at that bigger picture, what I see is a potential opportunity that lies out in front of these generations. We were the generation to break the curse. Hopefully they're the generation to bring in the blessings. So that's all I got. I am Brad Casper. This is Casper's Corner. Till the next one, subscribe. We're out.